The photograph arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped through the letterbox with the Morning Post. Emily Hargrove carried it to the kitchen table while her daughter Clara hummed as she ate her cereal. School photos were meant to be harmless, a keepsake for grandparents, something to tuck into albums. Yet as Emily unfolded the glossy print, a heaviness settled in her chest. The class sat neatly arranged in 3 rows. Neat uniforms, bright smiles, the teacher perched stiffly at the end. At first glance it was ordinary, but Emily's eyes, restless and sharp, snagged on the back row. There, half hidden behind 2 boys, was a face she did not recognize. His skin looked drained of color, his lips pressed flat in refusal to smile. Unlike the others, his eyes were not fixed on the camera. They seemed to look through it, hollow and searching, as though the lens had captured something it should not. Emily turned the photo slightly, thinking perhaps she was mistaken. "Clara," she said, voice tight, "who is that boy?" Her daughter leaned across the table, squinting. She shrugged lightly, spoon still in hand. "Which boy?" Emily pointed, her hand trembling more than she realized. Clara tilted her head. "There isn't anyone there, Mom. That's just the wall." The words struck harder than Emily expected. She stared again, and the face was still there, pale and deliberate, pressed among the living children as if claiming a place. A faint clatter startled her, the envelope slipping from the edge of the table to the floor. For a second, Emily thought she heard something else. A whisper so faint it could have been the rush of her own pulse. She pulled the photograph closer to her, unwilling to blink, unwilling to let that face vanish or change. The kitchen light flickered once, casting a brief shadow across the boy's image. Emily's breath caught. She knew every child in Clara's class, every parent at the gates, every name on the register. This boy did not belong, and yet there he was, watching her from inside the picture. The next morning, Emily carried the photograph into St. Aldwyn's Primary, the glossy paper burning in her hand like evidence no one would believe. The corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the fluorescent tubes above flickered in irregular pulses that made the walls seem alive. Children's voices echoed in the distance, sharp then fading, like laughter caught inside a tunnel. She found Miss Corbett, Clara's teacher, straightening a pile of exercise books at her desk. Emily placed the photograph down between them. "Tell me honestly," she demanded, her voice low but insistent. "Who is that boy?" Miss Corbett leaned over, brow furrowed. "Every child in this photo is in my class." Her tone was firm, yet her eyes lingered too long on the back row before she pushed the picture aside. "Perhaps the lighting has played a trick. Photographs can be strange things." Emily did not believe her. The hesitation, the way her fingers trembled as she set down the books, betrayed more than the words did. On her way out, Emily paused by the corridor where children were hanging coats. 2 boys whispered together, casting glances toward her before looking away. She crouched beside them. "What are you whispering about?" The smaller boy, Arthur, stared at the floor. The other, Thomas, muttered so quietly she almost missed it. "The boy who doesn't talk." Emily's pulse spiked. "Who is he?" Arthur's lips parted, then snapped shut as Miss Corbett's voice called them back to class. Neither looked at her again. That night, Emily struggled to sleep. The photograph lay in her dresser drawer, yet she could still picture the pale face, still feel its eyes upon her. Near midnight, Clara's voice pulled her from half-dream. Emily hurried into her daughter's room. Clara lay twisted in her sheets, murmuring with a soft, unsettled tone. "He sits beside me. Even when no one else sees." Emily froze. "Clara, who sits beside you?" Her daughter's lids fluttered, but she did not wake. "The boy, the one in the picture." The silence after those words was unbearable, pressing against the walls like a weight. Emily touched her daughter's hair, her own hand cold, her mind fractured between disbelief and terror. From the corner of the room, the nightlight flickered once, a brief pulse of shadow across the wall. Emily stared at it, throat dry. If Clara could see him, then he was more than a mistake on glossy paper, and tomorrow, Emily knew she had to find out who Daniel really was. Emily could not shake Clara's murmured words. By morning, her fear had sharpened into determination. After leaving her daughter at school, she made her way to the small municipal archive housed above the town library. The air there was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and dust that clung to her throat. Rows of files lined the shelves, brittle folders recording the lives of children who had once filled the same classrooms. Her fingers dragged along the spines until she reached a stack of registers from the early 1980s. Hours slipped past as she turned page after page, her eyes stinging, her heartbeat steady only when she finally saw it. Daniel Whitcomb, a name written in looping ink, his photograph clipped beside it. Emily's chest tightened. The face staring back was identical to the boy in Clara's class picture, pale, unsmiling, eyes dark with an unreadable sorrow. Below the entry a note, deceased, accident on school grounds, 1985. She whispered the name under her breath as though saying it might anchor him back to history where he belonged. But the photograph suggested otherwise. Daniel was still here, still sitting among the living. That evening she placed both photographs on the dining table, the old yearbook image and Clara's class print. The resemblance was undeniable. Her husband Alistair walked in, loosening his tie, his expression already wary. "You've been at this again." Emily pushed the pictures toward him. "Look at them. He's the same boy, Alistair. Decades apart, and yet he hasn't changed." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're frightening yourself with coincidences. Children look alike. Memory plays tricks. You're exhausted." "No," Emily snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of certainty. Clara spoke his name. "She feels him near." Alistair's eyes hardened, his shadow stretching long across the kitchen wall. "This obsession will tear the family apart if you let it." Emily's hands shook as she gathered the photographs, her heart refusing to settle. She could feel the boy's stare burning from the paper. Her husband's dismissal only deepened her resolve. If no one else would believe her, then she would uncover why Daniel Whitcomb had returned, and why he had chosen Clara. The photographs haunted Emily long after Alistair's dismissal. Every time she raised Daniel's name, she noticed a change in him. His jaw tightened, his hand twitched as if he wanted to silence her words. He avoided her eyes, shifting conversations, shutting down her questions with clipped remarks. One night, long after Clara had fallen asleep, Emily padded down the hallway. Alistair's office door was shut, the faint glow of a lamp spilling beneath it. She pushed it open quietly, but the room was empty. Papers were stacked neatly across his desk, yet something felt concealed. Her gaze landed on a battered metal box tucked beneath the cabinet. The lock resisted at first, but after a frantic search through the drawers, she found a key taped to the underside of a shelf. With trembling fingers, she slid it into the lock. The box opened with a reluctant click. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, their edges brittle, headlines blurred but unmistakable. "Local boy missing after school tragedy. Family mourns son, questions remain." And then Whitcomb death reopened. Police named suspect. Emily's stomach clenched as she unfolded the article. The suspect named was not some distant figure, but Alistair's brother, Rowan. The office door creaked. Emily froze as Alistair stepped inside. His face caught half in the lamplight, half in shadow. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he exhaled, heavy and bitter. "You weren't meant to see those." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you keep this hidden?" Alistair closed the door, his hand pressing hard against it. "Because I knew Daniel's family. My brother was questioned, accused even, but never charged. The case destroyed us. Do you understand what reopening this will do?" Her pulse raced, her fingers tightening around the clippings. "So you knew him. You knew Daniel." Alistair's expression darkened, jaw clenched, as though the name itself carried a weight he refused to bear. "I buried that part of my life. For good reason." Emily's chest heaved with fury and fear. The boy in the photograph was no longer a distant specter. He was tied to her family, anchored to her husband's past, and now she needed to know how deep Rowan's shadow stretched, and whether Alistair's silence was shielding more than just his brother. Emily could not rid herself of the image of Alistair's shadowed face, his jaw locked against confession. If he would not tell her the full truth, then she would drag it out of others. The next morning she waited until the final bell had cleared the corridors before slipping into Clara's classroom. Miss Harris was tidying away crayons, her expression pale under the humming strip light. Emily placed the school photograph on the desk between them. Her voice shook, but her resolve did not. "You saw him, didn't you? The boy who doesn't belong. Miss Harris froze, her hand hovering over the crayons. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed pulled from the depths of fear itself, she sat down. "You mustn't ask the children about him. It frightens them." Emily leaned closer. "So you admit it. You've seen him." Miss Harris's eyes darted to the door before she whispered, "Not just this year. Every few years, the same face appears in the class photo. Always in the back row, always unsmiling. At first, I thought it was some cruel trick of the camera, but then I began to notice he would shift closer." Her lips trembled as she spoke. Closer to one child in particular. Emily's pulse surged. "Which child this time?" Miss Harris hesitated, then looked down. "Clara." The sound of her daughter's name in that darkened classroom pressed like a fist into Emily's chest. She glanced at the rows of small wooden chairs, one slightly pulled out as though someone had just risen from it. The air felt colder there, thinner somehow. Emily gathered the photograph with shaking hands, her throat tight with rage and dread. Daniel Whitcomb was not bound to the school. He was choosing, and he had chosen Clara. The weight of that realization left her with only one path forward. If Daniel had attached himself to her daughter, she would have to discover why he would not let go. Emily drove home from the school with her pulse still racing, Miss Harris's whispered confession clawing at her thoughts. By the time she pulled into the driveway, Alistair was already waiting, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed. "You went digging again, didn't you?" His tone was not curious but accusing. Emily brushed past him, clutching Clara's school bag against her chest. "She's in danger, Alistair. The teacher has seen him too. Daniel isn't just in the photograph, he is with her." He followed her into the kitchen, his voice sharpening. "You hear yourself? You sound unwell. Clara needs stability, not a mother spinning ghost stories. Do you want her growing up frightened of her own shadow?" Emily spun on him, fury breaking through her fear. "Do not turn this on me. You knew that boy. You know more than you are telling me." Alistair's jaw set. "Enough, Emily. If you carry on like this, people will start to question your sanity." The words sliced deeper than any shout could. His dismissal felt deliberate, calculated, as if her terror were nothing more than a weakness to exploit. She fled upstairs, shutting herself in Clara's room. Inside the school bag, exercise books spilled onto the floor. One notebook opened flat across the carpet, its pages filled with jagged writing. Over and over in shaky, childish scrawl, the same name, Daniel. Some letters were pressed so hard the paper had torn. Emily dropped to her knees, her breath ragged. She traced one of the names with her fingertip, her body trembling as though she were touching Daniel's presence itself. Clara had not merely dreamt him. She was writing him into her world, pulling him closer with every stroke of her pencil. From the landing, Alistair's voice carried through the door, stern and muffled. "This obsession of yours will poison her, Emily. Stop before you ruin this family." Tears burned her eyes as she pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the mirror on Clara's wardrobe. Her reflection stared back, pale and broken, while his words echoed like a curse through the wood. But no matter how much he mocked or threatened, the proof was etched into the pages at her feet. Daniel was here, and Clara was his chosen companion. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, knowing the next step was unavoidable. She had to uncover what bound Daniel to her family, even if it meant tearing open Alistair's past. Emily waited until Alistair left for work before making her move. She told the school she would collect Clara later, then drove across town guided by an address she had found in the archives. The house was a crumbling terrace, ivy gripping the brickwork as though trying to strangle it. Curtains hung heavy and unwashed, blocking out the daylight. An elderly woman answered the door, her shoulders bent but her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Yes?" Emily steadied her voice. "My name is Emily Hargrove. I'm looking for anyone connected to Daniel Whitcomb." The woman's lips trembled as though the name had never stopped hurting. "I am his aunt. Why do you come now after so many years?" Inside, the sitting room was dim, the air thick with the scent of mothballs and damp fabric. On the mantelpiece sat a small toy soldier, its paint worn away. The woman reached for it, her hand clutching it with a tenderness that broke Emily's heart. "They told us he died in an accident," Emily said carefully. "But that isn't the whole truth, is it?" The woman's eyes glistened. "No, Daniel vanished on the day of the so-called accident. His body was never found. The police questioned boys who knew him. Rowan Hargrove was their first suspect. Then when his alibi faltered, they turned to his younger brother. Emily's breath caught. "Alistair?" The old woman nodded slowly. He was questioned for hours. They said he was the last to be seen with Daniel near the schoolyard. But their father was influential, and the case was buried. We never stopped asking, never stopped grieving. Emily gripped the arms of her chair, the revelation crushing her chest. The boy haunting Clara was not random, not a wandering spirit tied only to the school. He had been calling to the family that betrayed him, perhaps not for vengeance, but for the truth to be heard. She excused herself quickly, heart hammering. In the driver's seat of her car, she clutched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, eyes wide and unblinking. If Daniel had chosen Clara, it was because Alistair's silence had chained him here. And now the chain was tightening. By the time Emily reached home, dusk had fallen, and the house stood in a hush that felt more like a trap than comfort. She pushed open the door, her shoes heavy on the hallway floorboards. Clara's laughter floated faintly from the living room where the television played, but Emily's attention froze the moment she entered the kitchen. A photograph was pinned neatly to the fridge door. Not the one she had hidden away, but a new print, glossy and cold. Her stomach twisted before she even looked closer. Clara's class lined up once more. The same rows of uniforms, the same stiff smiles. But there, at the edge of the front row, stood Daniel Whitcomb. His hand rested possessively on Clara's shoulder, his face as pale and hollow as before. Clara smiled as though nothing were wrong. Emily's breath hitched. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the photo's edge. But before she could tear it down, Alistair's reflection caught her from the kitchen window. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression stripped of comfort. His eyes seemed hollow, almost resigned, as if the weight of years had finally cornered him. "You can't keep running from this," Emily said. Her voice raw, Alistair stepped forward, the dim light carving shadows across his face. "There are things you don't understand. Things that should have stayed buried." Her hands shook as she pressed them flat against the fridge, trying to steady herself against the sight of Daniel's pale grip on her daughter. "He isn't staying buried, Alistair. He's here. He chose Clara." Clara's laughter rang again from the other room, too innocent, too oblivious. The sound only deepened Emily's dread. Alistair's silence cut deeper than any confession could. The longer he stood there, jaw clenched, the more Emily realized he would never tell her the full truth. The kitchen light flickered once, plunging the room into a half-second of darkness. When it returned, Emily could have sworn Daniel's hand in the photograph pressed tighter on Clara's shoulder, his face leaning closer toward her. She closed the fridge slowly, the photo vanishing into the shadows, and the question clawed at her as the silence thickened. When the next class photo arrived, how many children would they count?